Welcome to Section 18.1, Part 1. This is the 184th session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. In this session, we'll map the landscape of natural disasters that a recovery plan must anticipate. What is disaster recovery planning, and how does it differ from business continuity? What makes an event a disaster in the first place? Which earth-driven hazards should you plan for? How do storms and fires threaten your facilities? And why do pandemics and other regional events belong in the same conversation? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because when the ground shakes or the water rises, nobody has time to invent a plan. Picture a regional credit union with 3 branches and 1 data center. If a wildfire forces an evacuation at 2 a.m, the staff on site must act from muscle memory. Your job as a security professional is to build the plan that carries them through the chaos, so recovery starts before the leadership team even arrives. So what exactly is disaster recovery planning? Think of it as the technical hands that carry out the strategy your business continuity plan designs. The business continuity plan sets priorities and decides what must survive. The disaster recovery plan installs the controls that prevent outages and restores service fast once one hits. Business continuity is the architect drawing the blueprint. Disaster recovery is the crew that keeps the building standing and rebuilds it. In practice, one team usually owns both under a single umbrella. What actually counts as a disaster? Any event that stops, prevents, or interrupts your ability to do your work. A flooded processing center qualifies. So does a fire that guts your main site or a threat that seals off an entire district. The trigger is simple. The moment your technology can no longer support mission-critical work, the recovery plan takes over. A good plan runs almost on autopilot, so trained people follow clear steps instead of debating what to do while tensions run high. Which earth-driven hazards should top your list? Start with earthquakes and floods, because they strike very differently. Earthquakes hit without warning, often along known fault lines. The real risk varies street by street, even inside a high-hazard region. Floods build slowly as rivers overflow, or explode as flash floods and dam breaches, and they cause billions in damage every year. Here is the practical trap. Standard business policies rarely cover flood loss, so you confirm specialized coverage before the water arrives, not after. Treat the fast onset and slow onset hazards as 2 separate response modes. How do storms and fires threaten your operations? Storms bundle several threats at once. High winds turn ordinary objects into projectiles. Hail batters equipment, and lightning fries sensitive electronics and knocks out power. Fires are just as unforgiving. Whether a wildfire races through a region or a single spark takes a critical facility, both share one lesson. Watch the forecasts and warning systems for your area, because a proactive response that begins hours early beats a scramble that begins too late. The organizations that survive are the ones already moving before the news breaks. Why do pandemics belong in a disaster plan? Because they attack in a way physical disasters do not. A pandemic leaves your buildings intact but empties them of people, since staff can no longer gather safely in one place. That forces you to plan for remote operations, contingency staffing, and coverage questions your insurance may not answer. And do not forget the localized events unique to your geography, from volcanic eruptions to avalanches to mudslides. If your operations span multiple regions, bring in local emergency experts, because they carry knowledge no headquarters checklist can match. So let's bring it together. Disaster recovery planning is the technical partner to business continuity, and it activates the instant technology can no longer carry critical work. A disaster is any event that halts your operations, so a good plan runs on autopilot with trained people and few decisions to make. Earthquakes and floods demand both fast onset and slow onset responses. Storms and fires reward early monitoring, and pandemics demand a people-first plan. Name the hazards that fit your geography, and you plan deliberately instead of hoping. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to Section 18.1, Part 2. This is the 185th session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. Nature is only half the threat picture, so now we turn to the disasters people cause. In this session, we'll walk through the human-made events a recovery plan must anticipate. Which human-caused fires and violent acts should you plan for? How do power and infrastructure failures ripple through operations? What happens when your own hardware and software let you down? Why do labor actions and theft deserve a seat at the table? And what new threat is artificial intelligence adding to the mix? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because the disasters most likely to hit you are not the dramatic ones. Picture a mid-sized logistics firm running its dispatch from one office park. A frayed wire starts a fire, or a contractor cuts the only fiber line into the building, and suddenly nothing ships. These quiet, everyday failures cause far more real outages than any headline event. Your plan has to treat the mundane threats with the same seriousness as the rare ones. Which fires and violent acts should you plan for? Start with the reminder that most fires are human-made, born of faulty wiring, carelessness, or arson, and building fires happen by the thousands every single day. Terrorism is far rarer, but far harder to predict, and it once wiped out small businesses that had no recovery plan at all. Bombings and explosions behave much like a large fire, but they lean heavily on physical security to prevent. The exam trap here is balance. Do not pour resources into exotic threats while ignoring the common ones that are far more likely to strike. How do power and infrastructure failures ripple through your operations? A short outage is the baseline every plan handles, usually with a battery backup that buys time to shut down cleanly or start a generator. But ask the harder question: could you survive a sustained loss of power for 2 days or 7? And power is only one utility. Water, gas, sewer, highways, railroads, and your internet connectivity are all lifelines, and any of them can fail on its own. Watch for hidden single points of failure, like 2 redundant internet providers that both enter your building through one vulnerable conduit. What happens when your own hardware and software let you down? Because they will. Components wear out and physically break, and software fails on bad input or hidden bugs. If you truly cannot tolerate downtime, the answer is full redundancy, with failover servers in separate locations that take over instantly. When budget rules that out, plan for fast parts replacement instead, keeping hard-to-find components in local inventory. Imagine waiting 3 days for one obscure part to ship from overseas while your operations sit dead. The goal is to remove that kind of single dependency before it removes you. Why do labor actions and theft deserve a seat at the table? Because a disaster does not have to come from weather or wires. If a large share of your workforce walks out at once, your ability to operate can collapse just as surely as if the building burned. That kind of crisis lives in your plan but belongs to human resources and operations, not the security team alone. Theft and vandalism are the everyday cousins of terrorism, far more likely and often aimed at physical infrastructure, like scrappers stealing copper from your cooling systems. Build in both prevention and contingency for the small-scale threats that add up. What new threat is artificial intelligence adding? A fast-growing one built on misinformation at machine speed. With large language models and autonomous agents, a bad actor can launch a coordinated disinformation campaign at a scale no human team could match. That can trigger reputational damage, financial panic, as automated systems react to fake news or bad calls made in the fog of a real crisis. The defense is preparation. Establish verifiable, trusted communication channels before a crisis hits, so that when false information floods in, your people already know which sources to believe. So let's bring it together. Human-made disasters range from everyday fires and rare terrorism to bombings that lean on physical security. Power and utility failures ripple widely, so hunt for hidden single points of failure. Hardware and software will fail, so choose redundancy or fast replacement before they do. Labor actions and theft are the quiet threats that still stop operations, and they need partners beyond security. And artificial intelligence now weaponizes misinformation, so trusted channels must exist before the crisis. Plan for the likely, not just the dramatic. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 18.2. This is the 186th session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. In this session, we'll dig into the technical controls that keep systems running when parts of them break. What do resilience, fault tolerance, and high availability actually mean? How do you measure availability? And why do the nines matter? How do you protect the disks that hold your data? How do you keep servers and power sources from becoming a single failure? What does trusted recovery guarantee after a crash? And how does quality of service protect the network under load? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because availability is a promise you make to the business, and hardware does not care about your promise. Picture a payment processor that must clear transactions around the clock. A single failed disk or one dead server cannot be allowed to take the whole platform down. Your job is to design so that when a component dies, and one always eventually does, the service simply keeps going while you quietly swap the broken piece. So what do resilience, fault tolerance, and high availability really mean? They all attack one enemy, the single point of failure, which is any component whose failure sinks the whole system. Fault tolerance means the system suffers a fault but keeps operating, achieved by adding redundant parts. Resilience means the system holds an acceptable service level during trouble and can return to its earlier state afterward. High availability layers on redundant components, like load balancing and failover, so a system bounces back fast from a brief hit. Think of a plane with multiple engines. Lose one and it still flies. How do you measure availability? And why do the nines matter? You measure it as the percentage of time a system is up. 3 nines means 99.9% availability, which still allows less than 44 minutes of downtime across a 30-day month. Push to 5 nines, and you have squeezed that budget down to roughly 26 seconds a month. Here is the catch worth remembering. Every extra 9 costs dramatically more to achieve because it demands stacking fault tolerance, resilience, and high availability together. Set the target to the business need, not to a vanity number. How do you protect the disks that hold your data? The workhorse is a RAID array, which combines 2 or more disks so the system survives a disk failure. Striping alone speeds things up but gives no protection. Mirroring keeps a full duplicate on a second disk. Striping with parity spreads recovery information so a lost disk can be mathematically rebuilt, and a dual parity variant survives 2 failed disks at once. A stripe of mirrors combines both ideas for speed and redundancy, but never confuse this with a backup. If a catastrophe destroys the whole array, or someone deletes a file, only a real backup brings the data back. How do you keep servers and power from becoming a single failure? For servers, you use a failover cluster, where a standby server automatically assumes the load the instant the active one dies. Pair that with a load balancer spreading traffic across several web servers, and you gain both scale and fault tolerance in one design. In the cloud, providers offer this as a managed service, and you can spread servers across regions for extra resilience. For power, a battery backup carries you through the brief gap, just long enough to shut down safely or spin up a generator, and the generator runs as long as the fuel keeps coming. Lock in a fuel contract before a widespread disaster drains the local supply. What does trusted recovery guarantee after a crash? It guarantees that a system is just as secure after a failure as it was before one. Part of that is preparing for failure with resilience, fault tolerance, and solid backups. The other part is how the system comes back, rebooting into a limited, non-privileged state so it never hands out access it should not. You also decide the failure posture in advance. A fail-secure system locks everything down when it breaks, favoring security, while a fail-open system grants access, favoring availability. The formal model defines 4 grades, from manual recovery that needs an administrator, up through automated recovery that restores specific functions on its own. How does quality of service protect the network under load? Quality of service manages the factors that shape the end-user experience when the network is stressed. It watches bandwidth, latency, jitter, packet loss, and interference, the ingredients that make a connection feel smooth or broken. Its real power is prioritization. It can push mission-critical traffic ahead of the merely nice-to-have, so a live executive video call takes precedence over someone streaming a show. It can even enforce security rules, like requiring encryption on certain traffic. Think of it as a traffic officer, waving the ambulance through before the delivery van. So let's bring it together. Resilience, fault tolerance, and high availability all exist to kill single points of failure. You measure success in nines, and each extra 9 costs far more. RAID arrays protect disks but never replace backups. Failover clusters protect servers, and battery backups plus generators protect power. Trusted recovery keeps a system secure through a crash, and you choose fail secure or fail open in advance. And quality of service protects the network by prioritizing what matters most. Design for the failure you know is coming, and availability takes care of itself. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to Section 18.3, Part 1. This is the 187th session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. In this session, we'll work through the choices that shape a rapid, orderly recovery. How does insurance fit into your recovery strategy? How do you decide what to restore first? How do crisis management and emergency communications keep order? What is workgroup recovery really aiming for? And what is a cold site, the first of your alternate processing options? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because the plan has to work when the experts are not yet in the room. Picture a healthcare billing company whose office floods overnight. The first employee to arrive at dawn should be able to start recovery from a clear playbook, not wait hours for the recovery team to assemble. Everything in this session exists to make that early, organized start possible. So how does insurance fit into your recovery strategy? It cushions the financial blow, but only if you buy the right coverage. The trap is settling for actual cash value, which pays out the depreciated market value of your damaged property, often far below what replacement really costs. Insist on a replacement cost clause, or your organization pays the gap out of pocket. Many providers now offer cybersecurity liability policies covering breaches of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Read the fine print before disaster, not after, so you know exactly what you are actually protected against. How do you decide what to restore first? You rank your business units and functions by priority, so the most critical come back first. Your business impact analysis is the perfect input here, because it already identifies which units are vital to the mission and puts a cost on failure. Watch one subtle point. Critical functions do not always live inside your most critical units, so your final list is a superset of both. And often the smartest move is partial. Restore your top unit to half capacity, then bring lower units online, reaching a minimum operating level across the whole organization before chasing full recovery. How do crisis management and emergency communications keep order? When disaster hits, panic sets in, and panic is the enemy of a good plan. The antidote is continuous training, so the people most likely to spot trouble, like guards and technical staff, act on reflex. Even calling emergency services can slip a panicked mind, so you train for it. Communication is the other half. Internally, employees need to know whether to come in or report elsewhere. Externally, if you go silent, the public assumes the worst. So route all media questions to public relations. And remember, the very disaster may have knocked out your normal communication channels. What is workgroup recovery really aiming for? It keeps the real goal in view, which is getting teams back to doing their actual work, not just powering systems back on. It is easy to treat recovery as a pure technology exercise and forget the people. Sometimes the best move is separate recovery facilities for different work groups. If a sister site already does similar work, you might temporarily relocate a team there and let them coordinate electronically until they can return home. This approach also helps larger organizations that could never find one facility big enough to house the entire operation at once. What is a cold site? The first of your alternate options. A cold site is bare standby space, big enough for your operations, with working power and environmental systems, but nothing else. No computers, no software, no active broadband links, maybe a few phone lines. Its appeal is cost, because there is almost nothing to maintain while it sits idle. But the drawback is brutal. Bringing it live means hauling in and configuring every server, restoring data from backups, and lighting up communications, a process often measured in weeks. That lag can create a false sense of security and makes a cold site the hardest option to test. It is cheap insurance that buys you slow recovery. So let's bring it together. Insurance softens the financial hit, but only replacement cost coverage truly protects you. You prioritize units and functions using your business impact analysis, and partial restoration often beats waiting for full recovery. Crisis management fights panic with training, and communications keep both staff and the public informed. Workgroup recovery keeps the focus on people getting back to work, and the cold site is your cheapest alternate facility at the price of the slowest recovery. Decide all of this before the storm, not during it. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 18.3, part 2. This is the 188th session of the CISSP exam prep series. This part completes the recovery strategy by finishing the tour of alternate sites and adding database recovery. In this session, we'll compare the faster recovery facilities and the ways you keep data ready off-site. What is a hot site, and when is it worth the cost? Where does a warm site fit in between? What are mobile sites and cloud recovery good for? Why are mutual assistance agreements rarely used? And how do you keep a database recoverable off-site? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because the site you choose is a direct trade between money and recovery speed. Picture an online brokerage that loses trades the instant its systems go dark. For that firm, waiting weeks for a cold site would be fatal, so it pays for near-instant failover. Your job is to match the recovery facility to how much downtime and data loss the business can actually survive. So what is a hot site, and when is it worth the cost? A hot site is the opposite of a cold one, a fully equipped backup facility kept in constant working order. Servers and workstations are pre-configured, software is loaded, and production data is replicated continuously or periodically. If replication is live, you switch operations over in moments. The protection is unmatched. But so is the price, because a hot site roughly doubles your spending on hardware, software, and staff. Remember, it also holds copies of your production data, so it needs the same security as your primary site. Some firms tame the cost by using it as a test environment or sharing it, though sharing risks lockout in a widespread disaster. Where does a warm site fit in between? A warm site is the sensible middle ground. It keeps pre-configured equipment and data circuits ready to run, but unlike a hot site, it does not hold a live copy of your data. To bring it online, you transport backup media in and restore your critical data onto the standby servers. That step means activation typically takes at least half a day versus the seconds or minutes a hot site needs. In exchange, you dodge the heavy telecommunications and staffing costs of keeping data mirrored in real time. If you share a warm site, write a no lockout clause into the contract so demand never leaves you stranded. What are mobile sites and cloud recovery good for? A mobile site is a self-contained, relocatable unit, often a trailer with its own environmental controls, that you can deploy wherever a disaster strikes. It shines for workgroup recovery and is usually set up as a cold or warm site, since you rarely know in advance where it will land. Cloud recovery has become the go-to for many organizations. You store ready-to-run images with a provider and avoid most operating costs until a disaster actually activates the site. If you rely on the cloud this way, negotiate a resource capacity agreement so the provider is contractually bound to supply the capacity you will need when everyone else needs it too. Why are mutual assistance agreements rarely used? A mutual assistance agreement is two organizations pledging to shelter each other's operations in a disaster, sharing facilities without a big capital outlay. On paper, it looks wonderfully cheap. In practice, 3 problems sink it. Enforcement is hard because a partner who is unharmed may quietly renege when the moment comes. Proximity is a paradox, since partners close enough to be useful may be hit by the very same disaster. And confidentiality worries make firms reluctant to hand their sensitive data to an outside party. These agreements work best between two units of the same company who already share an incentive to cooperate. How do you keep a database recoverable off-site? You pick from three techniques: trading cost against how little data you can afford to lose, guided by your recovery point objective. Electronic vaulting ships full database backups to a remote site in bulk, which is simple but can leave a real gap since you recover only to the last vaulting run. Remote journaling is faster, moving transaction logs frequently, often hourly, so far less is lost. Remote mirroring is the top tier and the most expensive, keeping a live server at the backup site that receives every change as it happens, ready to take over instantly. Pick the one that lands inside your recovery point objective, because losing more is risky and losing less than needed just wastes money. So let's bring it together. A hot site delivers near-instant recovery at roughly double the cost, while a warm site saves money by holding equipment but not live data. Mobile sites travel to the disaster, and cloud recovery keeps costs low until you actually need it, backed by a capacity agreement. Mutual assistance agreements look cheap but rarely survive enforcement, proximity, and confidentiality problems. And for databases, you scale from electronic vaulting to remote journaling to remote mirroring, always staying inside your recovery point objective. Match the tool to the tolerance, and recovery becomes a budget decision, not a gamble. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to Section 18.4, Part 1. This is the 189th session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. In this session, we'll cover the first building blocks of recovery plan development. Why does a plan need different documents for different readers? What belongs in an emergency response checklist? How do personnel, contacts, and assessment fit in? And how do backup types and storage strategies protect your data? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because a plan that lives only in one expert's head is no plan at all. Picture a regional insurer where the one person who understood recovery just left the company. If everything walked out the door with them, the next disaster becomes a guessing game. Your job is to write the plan down clearly, in the forms different people will actually reach for when the pressure is on. So why does a plan need different documents for different readers? Because a technician and an executive need very different things in a crisis. One master document that tries to serve everyone serves no one well under stress. Instead, you maintain tailored versions. An executive summary gives leaders the high-level picture. Department plans let each team refresh only what affects them. Technical guides walk IT staff through standing up alternate sites. And concise checklists guide recovery team members through the chaos. The point is speed of comprehension, so each reader finds their piece without wading through everyone else's. What belongs in an emergency response checklist? Simple, clear instructions for the very first moments of a disaster. These vary widely, since a sudden fire allows far less time than a hurricane still a day or two out. The design rule is unbreakable. Order the tasks by priority, most important first. Because responders in a crisis often will not finish the list before they have to evacuate. Anything low on the list is likely to be skipped. And one critical item lives here, the formal declaration of a disaster, with clear criteria for activation and a named person who holds the authority to make that call. How do personnel, contacts, and assessment fit in? Your plan needs a live contact list of the people who execute recovery, and it must include backups. Give every key role alternate contact methods and a secondary person, because the primary contact may be unreachable or unable to get to the site. Assessment then runs alongside the response. It happens in a rolling fashion. First responders make a quick triage read to get recovery moving, and as the situation develops, more detailed assessments follow to judge how well efforts are working and where to steer resources next. Both the contact list and the assessment keep the response organized rather than reactive. How do backup types protect your data? Backups are your last-ditch copies, and there are three kinds worth knowing cold. A full backup copies everything and resets the archive marker on each file. An incremental backup grabs only what changed since the last backup of any kind, then resets the marker, so it is quick to create but slow to restore, since you replay the full plus every increment in order. A differential backup grabs everything changed since the last full backup and leaves the marker alone, so it grows larger but restores fast, needing only the full +1 differential. The trade is simple. Incrementals are cheap to make and costly to restore. Differentials are the reverse. How do storage strategies keep those backups safe? Where you keep the media matters as much as making it. Local copies are convenient for everyday requests, but you must keep at least one copy off-site, or a single disaster destroys both your systems and your only backups. A popular approach is a geographically redundant cloud service, letting you retrieve backups from anywhere after a disaster. Though spreading data across jurisdictions can raise new regulatory duties. Most organizations blend backup types with a rotation scheme, often full backups on the weekend and incrementals or differentials nightly. Your recovery point objective drives the design, because the less data loss you can tolerate, the more frequent your backups must be. So let's bring it together. A good plan is really several documents, each shaped for the reader who needs it. Emergency response is a priority ordered checklist that includes the formal disaster declaration. A backed up contact list and rolling assessment keep the response organized. Full, incremental, and differential backups trade creation time against restore time, and storage strategy demands an off-site copy driven by your recovery point objective. Write it down, order it by priority, and store it where a disaster cannot reach both copies at once. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 18.4, part 2. This is the 190th session of the CISSP exam prep series. This part finishes recovery plan development with the backup practices and support elements that hold the plan together. In this session, we'll cover the modern storage options and the pieces people often overlook. How do disk-to-disk and cloud storage change your backups? What best practices make backups actually reliable? What is a software escrow arrangement, and when do you need one? How do you plan for utilities, logistics, and supplies? And why do we separate recovery from restoration? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because a backup that was never tested is just a comforting story. Picture a manufacturer whose backup software reported success every night for a year. When a server finally failed, the restore did not work, and a year of confidence evaporated in an hour. Your job is to close these quiet gaps, so that when the plan is called, every support piece actually holds. So how do disk-to-disk and cloud storage change your backups? They answer a simple problem, that data has outgrown tape. With drives now measured in terabytes, many organizations back up disk-to-disk, sometimes using virtual tape libraries that make disks look like tapes to existing software. But disk-to-disk carries one caution: geographic diversity. So some of those disks must sit off-site, often managed by a service provider. Cloud storage takes this further, offering scalable, geographically diverse copies you can retrieve from anywhere, frequently with built-in redundancy and lower cost. Just remember that storing data across jurisdictions makes regulatory compliance part of the design, not an afterthought. What best practices make backups actually reliable? A handful of habits separate real protection from false comfort. Backups are heavy on the network, so schedule them for off-peak hours like overnight. Data only grows, so build in capacity for expansion before it strains your media. Every periodic backup leaves a gap, and failures love to strike right before the next run. So consider continuous methods where the gap is unacceptable. Back up only what you need, letting your recovery time objective decide whether keeping many system images is worth the storage. And above all, actually test your recovery, because trusting a green success message without ever restoring is a leading cause of backup failure. What is a software escrow arrangement, and when do you need one? It is a safeguard against a software vendor disappearing or abandoning support. The developer deposits their source code with a neutral third party who holds updated copies securely. The agreement defines trigger events, like the vendor breaching a service level agreement or going out of business. And when one fires, the third party releases the code to you so you can maintain the product yourself. Focus these agreements on smaller suppliers you fear might fail, since a giant vendor is both hard to negotiate with and unlikely to vanish. It is insurance for the software your business quietly depends on. How do you plan for utilities, logistics, and supplies? These are the unglamorous pieces that recovery lives or dies on. Your plan should carry contact information and troubleshooting steps for critical utilities like power, water, gas, and sewer, so a service problem during a disaster does not become a second crisis. Logistics can be enormous because you may suddenly need to move large numbers of people, equipment, and supplies to a recovery site. And if people will live at that site for a stretch, the plan must provide for food, water, shelter, and facilities. Think of it as running a small temporary town, not just relocating a server room. Why do we separate recovery from restoration? Because they are two different jobs on two different clocks. Recovery means getting business operations running again, usually at an alternate site. And the recovery team works against a hard deadline. Miss your maximum tolerable downtime or recovery time objective, and the business can fail. Restoration means bringing the original facility back to a workable state, and the salvage team has more breathing room. Here is the subtle danger. Returning to the primary site is itself risky, so the salvage team moves the least critical processes back first to stress test the rebuild, and the emergency is not truly over until full normal operations run at the restored site. So let's bring it together. Disk-to-disk and cloud storage modernize backups but demand off-site copies and compliance awareness. Reliable backups come from off-peak scheduling, capacity planning, and above all, real recovery testing. Software escrow protects you when a key vendor fails, and utilities, logistics, and supplies are the support pieces that recovery depends on. Finally, recovery and restoration are separate phases, and returning to the primary site is its own carefully staged risk. Close the quiet gaps now, so the plan holds when it counts. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 18.5. This is the 191st session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. In this session, we'll cover how a recovery plan reaches the people who must use it, who needs training, and at what depth. How should the plan itself be documented and controlled? And how do you protect a plan that is also a sensitive document? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because a beautifully written plan is worthless if the responders have never practiced it or cannot find it when the lights go out. Picture a utility company whose recovery binder sits perfectly maintained on an intranet that goes dark the moment a storm hits. The finest plan in the world just became unreachable. Your job is to make sure the plan is both known and available at the exact moment it is needed. So who needs training, and at what depth? Everyone touched by the plan, but not everyone to the same degree. New hires get orientation training as a baseline. Anyone stepping into a recovery role for the first time gets initial training on that role. Core recovery team members need detailed refreshers to keep their skills sharp. And the wider workforce only needs light awareness reminders, which you can fold into regular meetings or a periodic email newsletter. Match the depth to the responsibility, so critical players stay fluent while everyone else stays aware. How should the plan be documented and controlled? Fully and as a living document. Keep the documentation current, updating it every time the plan changes, because an outdated plan can be worse than none. Use formats that make small updates painless, so a single revised page does not force you to reprint everything. Because these plans change often, many organizations publish them on a secured part of the intranet for easy access. But that convenience hides a risk. A real disaster may take the intranet down, so keep an adequate number of current printed copies at both your primary and alternate sites. How do you protect a plan that is also sensitive? Treat it as confidential and share it on a need-to-know basis. Each participant should fully understand their own role, but they do not need the entire plan, so you compartmentalize access. At the same time, avoid the opposite failure. Key team members and senior management must have the complete plan and grasp the high-level implementation, Because you never want all that knowledge locked inside one person's head. The balance is deliberate, wide enough that recovery survives the loss of any individual, tight enough that the plan does not leak. So let's bring it together. Training is tiered, from light awareness for everyone up to detailed refreshers for the recovery team. The plan must be fully documented, kept current, and stored so a disaster cannot make it unreachable, which means printed copies alongside any intranet version. And because the plan itself is sensitive, you share it on a need-to-know basis while ensuring key leaders hold the whole picture. Known, available, and protected, that is a plan people can actually use. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 18.6. This is the 192nd session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. In this session, we'll cover how you prove a recovery plan works and keep it working over time. Why must you test a plan at all? What are the 6 test types, from harmless to disruptive? How do the paper and discussion tests work? How do the hands-on tests raise the stakes? What does a lessons learned session accomplish? And how do maintenance and test communications keep the plan alive? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because an untested plan is a hypothesis, not a safeguard. Picture a retail chain that wrote its recovery plan 2 reorganizations ago and never revisited it. Half the named contacts have left, and a key system was replaced. The plan reads beautifully and would fail completely. Your job is to test regularly and maintain constantly, so the plan on paper matches the organization that actually exists today. So why must you test a plan at all? Because a plan only proves itself under exercise. Testing confirms the provisions still work and that the plan still fits an organization that never stops changing. Which test you choose depends on your recovery facilities, your culture, and who is available. There are 6 main types, and they form a ladder from zero disruption to full shutdown. Learn them as a progression, because the exam loves to ask which test does what and how much it disturbs normal operations. How do the paper and discussion tests work? These are the low-impact rungs of the ladder. A read-through simply distributes the plan to team members for review, which quietly catches obsolete details and reveals when someone is left with no replacement named. A tabletop gathers the team to role-play a scenario the moderator reveals on the spot, talking through the right responses. A walkthrough goes a step further, sometimes adding physical actions, like having people leave the building as part of the exercise. None of these interrupt real business, which makes them safe, frequent, and easy to justify. How do the hands-on tests raise the stakes? Here, the ladder gets real. A simulation test presents a scenario and actually carries out some of the response, which may pause non-critical activities and pull in operational staff. A parallel test goes further, relocating people to the alternate site and activating it for real, while the main facility keeps running normal business untouched. A full interruption test is the top rung and the riskiest, actually shutting down the primary site and shifting everything to the recovery facility, then reversing it. Because that risk is so high, full interruption tests are hard to schedule and often meet resistance from management. What does a lessons learned session accomplish? It turns an incident into improvement. After any recovery effort, you gather everyone involved to reflect honestly on their role and the team's overall response, so the process and technology get better for next time. A neutral facilitator who played no part in the response leads it, keeping the conversation open and free of defensiveness. Speed matters, because memories fade fast, so you hold it soon after the event. Guided by a structured set of questions about what happened and what could improve, the session produces a report that maps out concrete process improvements. How do maintenance and test communications keep the plan alive? Maintenance treats the plan as a living document that changes as the organization changes. Minor tweaks may travel by a few emails or calls, while major shifts need full team meetings, and your regular testing is exactly what surfaces the needed changes. Fold updates into your formal change management, so every infrastructure change refreshes the documentation. Communication wraps around every test. Before a test, tell stakeholders the timing, impact, and goals. During a disruptive test, give regular progress updates. Afterward, run a debrief on what worked and what did not, and keep regulators informed where the rules demand it. So let's bring it together. Testing proves a plan works. And the 6 types climb a ladder from read-throughs and tabletops, through walkthroughs and simulations, up to parallel and full interruption tests. The higher the rung, the greater the disruption and the risk. Lessons learned sessions convert each event into concrete improvements, and maintenance keeps the plan matched to a changing organisation through change management. Test communications keep stakeholders and regulators informed at every step. Test it, learn from it, and keep it current, or the plan slowly drifts into fiction. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session.